Hello everybody, I thought I'd share another personal story with you. As this channel's all about scary things, I thought I would tell you about the scariest thing that I've ever been through. Sometimes I worry that this channel's a bit impersonal, so it'd be a good way to share a bit more about myself. Now this isn't going to involve anything particularly creepy, nothing paranormal. In fact, it's probably going to be a bit cringeworthy, and it's going to be a bit TMI. So if you're not interested in things that aren't paranormal or creepy, then feel free to skip. I'm not using a script for this one, I'm just talking about my own experience from memory, and it might not be as good as my usual videos, but let's get on with it anyway. So one of my greatest fears has always been hospitals, needles, doctors, anything medical basically. All through my life, I couldn't even watch anything on TV to do with hospitals. I could watch pretty much any horror movie without flinching, but as soon as something came on TV about hospitals, I'd just have to turn over straight away. Hadn't been to a doctor's for about 15 years or so. If I ever got sick, I'd usually just tough it out and get well again on my own. It wasn't until a couple of years ago. This is where the too much information thing comes in, but I was sat there one day, as you do, hands down your pants. I felt a lump on one of my nuts and just absolutely shit myself basically. I just didn't know what to do. If it wasn't for my wife forcing me to go to the doctors, I would never have gone. Even just going to the doctors to get checked, I was panicking, I was terrified, I just couldn't handle the idea of going to a doctor's. I hadn't been in about 15 years, and so I went to the doctor's. She had a feel and sent me for an ultrasound scan. So I went for this ultrasound scan. I was also terrified of this. What made it worse was that when I went for the ultrasound scan, they were actually training someone, so I had to have about 3 people stood around while they did the ultrasound on my ball sack. It was not the most dignified thing to go through, but these people are saving lives. I suppose they've got to learn somehow. Got the results back about a week later. The doctor called me up and said, can I come in straight away? And told me I had cancer and that I had to go for a blood test immediately. I hadn't had a needle in about 20 years by that point. Considering I couldn't even look at one on a TV without getting freaked out. The idea of getting a blood test, something which I'd never had done in my life, I was absolutely petrified. Little did I know that this was going to be one of about 20 blood tests I'd have to have done that year. So pretty much the only thing to have done when you get diagnosed with testicular cancer is to have your testicle removed, and that's what I was set up to have done. And then the day of the operation came. I've always had this big fear about waking up during some kind of surgery. I've heard all these horror stories about anesthesia awareness, and that was my biggest fear. Before it happens, the surgeon comes round and tells you exactly what they're going to do in the procedure. I don't know if you know anything about how they remove a testicle from the human body. They don't just go in through the sac like you'd imagine. They actually cut open quite a big hole up near your hip, quite high up, and then they kind of send some kind of, I don't know if it's some kind of hook, and they hook your testicle through this hole and pull it up out of that hole and snip it off. The surgeon was describing all this to me before I went in for the surgery, which just freaked me out even more. So I just could imagine being awake through the whole thing. Like I say, I'd read all these stories about people under anesthesia but being awake and being able to feel everything but unable to move. So that was my biggest fear at the time, and just the fact that I had all this stress about having cancer, being diagnosed with cancer, and yeah, I didn't handle it very well, but I had this surgery, don't remember a thing, I just remember being wheeled into the room, having the anaesthesia pumped into a vein in my hand, then waking up. It was actually quite a minor surgery. I got to go home that same day and had a few weeks off work, and then I was back to working order. All in all, it wasn't as bad as I'd expected it to be. From all the types of cancer in the world, testicular cancer is one of the ones with the highest survival rates, so I started to feel pretty positive about things. I still had to go for blood tests every month and also regular CT scans. And it was also about the time that I was going through all this that I sort of stopped uploading to the channel. I uploaded a few videos over this time, but not as many as I had. At one point I was getting loads of views on all my videos. I was really happy the way it was going, but then when all this happened, I kind of didn't have the heart to make very many videos. My channel took a hit as a result. wasn't until about 9 months after this that after another CT scan that my oncologist asked me to come in, told me that the last scan hadn't been too good. What they'd noticed was a lymph node in my belly had swollen up rapidly. They were fairly certain that it was the cancer that had spread to my torso, and I'd needed to go in for surgery as soon as possible. But this time it was going to be major surgery. The lymph nodes in question was basically in my belly, behind my intestines, and the only way to get to it was basically to gut me like a fish. And they had to cut open my belly from my chest down to my groin, open me up, move all the intestines over to one side so that they could get in and get this lymph node out. I had pretty much had no choice. I was, again, terrified. They told me that it was a fairly safe operation, but that there was a 1% mortality rate, a 1% chance that I'd die. The surgery was scheduled for a few days before Christmas, and the reason why I was extra scared by this was that the 2 Christmases previous to this, somebody close to me had died. One person had died on Christmas Day. The Christmas after that, someone had gone into hospital on Christmas Day and died a few weeks later. There was a bit of a morbid joke going around, like, oh, who's going to die this Christmas? And when I got this news and got told that my surgery would be a few days before Christmas, the joke suddenly stopped. So this was going to be a much bigger operation, and I can't really remember much about what I felt like beforehand. I remember I was scared, but I think I was so scared that I wasn't able to think. It was just like I was in a bubble. Again, I remember being wheeled into the anesthesia room, then pumping a few different drugs into my veins, and next minute I was awake. Apparently I'd been in surgery for about 7 hours. I just remember waking up and they were pumping morphine into my veins because I'd just been through this major surgery and I had this massive wound down my body. Kind of ended up looking like someone had done an autopsy on me, but luckily they managed to get the lymph node out. And the thing about this surgery was, because of the way they had to sort of squish all my intestines over to one side to get to the lymph node, and when they put it all back into place and sew me up, it basically made my entire digestive tract shut down. So it was like I was kind of carrying around a dead man's guts in my body. I couldn't go to the toilet, I couldn't eat. If you watched my video about coffin births, this was part of the inspiration for making that video. After surgery like this, your intestines swell up and just keep swelling and swelling, and my belly was completely bloated to a point where it was almost unbearable. I couldn't eat any food or go to the toilet to relieve any of this pressure. It was just like making pressure against the stitches on my belly. That was the most uncomfortable thing about it. The actual surgery wound didn't really hurt that much. It was if you imagine how bad it hurts when you've got really bad trapped wind, it was like that times 100. I was in hospital for about 5 days. Basically, you have to wait around in hospital until your intestines start to wake up again. I ended up losing loads of weight because of it, because I couldn't eat any food. Anything I ate just made me feel sick. On top of that, I was also in the urology ward. So I was in a ward with a load of old men who were constantly getting up using the toilet because they'd had various operations on their kidneys or urinary tracts. There was one toilet in the ward, basically because of some of the operations the other people in the ward had. They had to piss into a jug and leave it on top of the toilet system for the nurses to check. So anytime I wanted to go try and use the toilet, bearing in mind that I felt absolutely nauseous the whole time, I had to go into this toilet with all these piss jugs lined up along the top of the cistern. And some of them were different colours, some of them were red, some of them had bits floating in them. It only contributed to me feeling more sick and made me lose my appetite even more. I was glad to get out of that place. And I got about 6 months off work in total, I think, after that. It took me a long time to recover. I've ended up with a gigantic scar all down my body. So those were the 2 major incidents, but there was something else that happened only a few months ago. I got a call off my doctor again. My last CT scan had shown something unusual. I had to go in to talk to them. What the scan had shown is that in my chest, a lymph node had become inflamed, and also they could see dark spots on one of my lungs. And they weren't really sure what that was. Of course, I was heartbroken. I'd just got to a point where I thought my tests had been cut down to every 3 months, and I was starting to feel a bit positive for once. And now I was sure that the cancer had returned, and that was it for me. I was just convinced that I was going to die. they needed to get another sample from this lymph node, but they weren't going to cut me open this time. What they actually had to do was something called an EBUS with fine needle aspiration, and what that involves is they basically send a camera down into my windpipe, and the camera has a needle on the end. And what they need to do is stick the needle through my windpipe into the lymph node on the other side of that windpipe. And for all the other operations and things that I've had done, I've always been completely knocked out, but they said that this time I had to have something called twilight anesthesia, which is basically where they give you enough anesthesia to kind of make you forget what's happening, but you're awake at the time. And then they also give you some kind of morphine derivative to calm you down and make you breathe more slowly. They assured me that I would completely forget the whole thing. I actually think I remember most of it, and I'm going to describe what I remember from this. So I went into this room, they put me on this kind of dentist chair type of thing. There was loads of nurses all around me. They started injecting me with these drugs. They did sort of make me feel calmer and a bit sort of drunk. And then they put this weird sort of guard in my mouth that kept my mouth open. Told me to lie back. They said, oh, it's kicking in now, because I started to close my eyes. And then they started feeding this camera down my throat, and I remember it's like the feeling like if you've ever put your fingers down your throat and felt like instant sort of choking reaction. You can't really help it. I was just sort of choking, and they were feeding this camera down my throat. They also gave me some kind of mouth spray before this that numbed the back of my throat. So I must have blacked out a couple of times. I remember sort of the morphine would kick in quite a bit, and I'd sort of start to drift off. And this is one of the reasons why you need to be semi-conscious while they do this to you, is that the drugs they give you can make you breathe really shallowly and can affect your oxygen levels, so they need to keep reminding you to breathe deeply. Yeah, I remember occasionally just drifting out as if I was falling asleep, and then the nurse would say, breathe, take a deep breath, and I would, and I'd come back into consciousness. And I just remember being sort of on this chair, all these nurses around me, this camera down my throat. Pretty much when they weren't moving the camera around, it was okay. I couldn't really tell it was in there. It was very thin. It was whenever they tried to move it, suddenly I'd get this uncontrollable urge to choke. It was, I'd imagine that's what being waterboarded is like. And I also remember they had this like screen above me, a monitor with the pictures from the camera. I remember seeing like all these different pictures of inside my windpipe, and occasionally there'd be a load of blood come up and they'd suck it away with some kind of tube. And then when they had to take the sample with a needle, it felt like they were fucking my throat with this thing. It was like they were going up and down, in and out, like rapidly. I think that was how they got the tissue sample out. And then they'd have to take the sample. Somebody at a table would be looking at it under a microscope to check they've got enough cells to make a diagnosis. And then I remember her saying like, no, we haven't, you got to go back in and do it again. And they repeatedly were doing this procedure on me where they were moving this camera rapidly up and down inside my windpipe, and I just couldn't stop choking. It was like being suffocated basically, and every time they'd do it and then they'd stop and I'd be able to take a breath and it'd be alright, and then they'd do it again. And I remember all of that. They said I'd forget the whole thing straight away, but I guess maybe they didn't give me enough anesthesia, I don't know, but yeah, I remember pretty much the whole thing. That wasn't a pleasant experience either. But luckily the tests came back from that, and it turned out it wasn't cancer returning. It was something called sarcoidosis, which is it's a fairly common chest disease. It goes away. It doesn't really have any symptoms apart from showing up strangely on scans. Some people get problems, but apparently I didn't. It seems to have gone away now. It's just that fear that you get when you hear something like that. The reason why I wanted to make this video as well was just to talk about the effects of fear. I make all these videos about scary things, but because I'd gone through this event which was so scary to me, when the doctors started to say, that you seem to be okay now, I started to get this sort of depression and anxiety, and I didn't really know why. I should have been feeling extremely grateful and lucky and happy to have survived this, but I don't know, the opposite started to happen. I started to feel scared all the time. I stopped going out and socialising. I'd feel like panicked in public places. I got all this depression. I didn't want to get out of bed. At a time when I felt like I should be getting on and enjoying my life and being thankful for what I've got. The opposite. I ended up having to go to the doctors again. I didn't really know what was going on with me, but apparently I was going through something similar to post-traumatic stress. And now I know people who've been in like combat situations, that's real PTSD, and I'm not trying to compare my experience to anything like that. That's what the doctor said it was similar to when I was going through the cancer. My body had gone into some kind of survival mode. I basically didn't really have a lot of time to process what was happening to me, but as soon as I was told that it was okay and I didn't have to have any further treatment, that was when my brain was able to think back and think, oh my god, I've just gone through all this. That's when all the feelings that I'd been suppressing came to the surface. I started going to see a therapist, and she said it was like my brain was sending fear signals, but because there wasn't anything actually to be scared of, my body was looking around for this source of fear. This is why I was feeling this sort of constant anxiety, but it's because when your brain sends out fear signals, your body responds. It sends back a signal to the brain saying, I can't see anything to be afraid of. The brain sends back another signal saying, there must be something, I'm feeling afraid. And basically you get into this sort of feedback loop of anxiety. After a while I gave up the therapy because it just wasn't working for me. I didn't feel like I was getting any better. I tried going on to some antidepressants for a while. I gave those up after a few days because I couldn't handle the side effects. The reason why I started making videos again on this channel was because I thought the best way to deal with the anxiety and the depression that I was going through was to give myself something to do. So I threw myself back into making these videos. I actually bought a microphone, started recording my voice, and this was basically to try and give myself some kind of diversion, something to do. A lot of the reasons why I came back and started making videos again was just to try and get active and to get over some of the mental health problems that I was experiencing. So it's hard to keep up to a regular schedule with this. I've got a part-time job and also I have to go to the hospital a lot. But I hope you're enjoying the stuff that I've been making recently. A lot of people say they do, and I'm glad to have the viewers start coming back and watching my videos again. So yeah, that's a personal story, the scariest thing I've ever been through. There's a few plus sides to this. I've completely got over my fear of needles. In fact, and I'm not trying to sound edgy when I say this, but I actually quite enjoy getting blood tests now. I don't know what it is, I kind of like that feeling of the needle going into my vein. It's strange, but it's kind of a pleasant feeling, it doesn't hurt. I never had to go for any chemotherapy or radiotherapy, which I feel extremely lucky about because I would have hated to go through that. If it comes back again, I'll have to go for chemotherapy, but so far I've managed to escape that nightmare. So I'll end the video here. Hopefully I don't sound like I'm trying to get sympathy from people. I'm just trying to give a bit of more of a personal side to my channel and let people know about the true nature of fear. This has been quite a different video to what I usually make. I usually talk about paranormal and creepy things. So if you're interested in any of that, go and check out some of my other videos on my channel, and until then, I'll see you next time.